There are few issues in sport which attract more hateful social media posts than the issue of transgender and intersex athletes. Well-funded campaigns pushing particular social agendas would have you believe that sport is being inundated with men masquerading as women so they can win gold medals in women's events. In the USA, 0.002% of college athletes are trans. In the Olympics, it's 0.001% of all athletes who are trans, and no trans athlete has ever won a gold medal. Intersex athletes have won gold medals, but these same athletes have also been beaten by other women, which raises one very important question. If we are testing for unfair advantage, then are we testing for all unfair advantages? Or is it only the SRY gene in gender testing that we're interested in? What about other physical advantages that athletes might have? Height, weight, skill, power, or any other unfair advantage that might have nothing to do with the athlete themselves, like coming from a country with far superior coaching techniques and training facilities. Are we testing for those unfair advantages as well? Gender tests were started nearly 100 years ago, but were phased out of world sport around the time of the Sydney 2000 Olympic Games because of issues that were highlighted by both scientists, experts in the area, and even the IOC's Athletes Commission. Fast forward to 2025, and World Athletics has reintroduced mandatory sex testing. So has World Boxing. Although both sports argue it's not mandatory, the athletes have a choice. They can take the test and continue to compete, or not take the test and be unable to. The first female president of the International Olympic Committee, Kirsty Coventry, has made the women's category a focal point of her first term. She's established a working group to come up with recommendations. I'm just wondering if it would be correct for us in the media to suggest that it's been taken away from a human rights focus and moved much more towards a medical focus. And I know you're respecting the anonymity of the members of your working group at the moment, and I respect that. But just wondering if there are not neutral people, but outside people who also bring their expertise to the working group's discussions, or whether it's purely based on members from international federations.
Thanks, Tracy. The expert working group is only made up of experts. The international federations we will have interactions with, and they are talking to, but they're not formal members of the working group. And they are experts that are coming from human rights, from medical and from legal, as well as from the sport movement.
As a quick follow-up, if I can, have you heard from any of the previous athletes who have been impacted, particularly with regard to the DSD scenario and lifelong impacts that they have felt, and whether their experiences play into the working group?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. The athletes that the working group will be speaking to all stakeholders, so not just the IFs, but they will be speaking to athletes across the board, athletes that are competing, athletes that are no longer competing, athletes that have gone through transitions, athletes that would potentially be classified maybe DSD. The group has been asked to not leave anyone out because, again, I don't think that we can truly find a consensus without having at least spoken to everyone that this impacts. So that is why there's also no time limit, because to set a very restrictive time limit for this group to do the adequate and necessary conversations that they need to have, I think is really very important, and probably more important than setting a very strict deadline to them. So they will be consulting with everybody.
Thank you. The members of the IOC working group will have their identities protected, unlike the athletes who have been and will be targeted by sports policies, sometimes leaving their lives in ruin. At the recent World Athletics Championships in Tokyo, every female competitor was gender tested. Ahead of the event, the World Athletics president, Lord Sebastian Coe, was asked whether he'd heard any feedback from athletes who might have concerns over breaches of data privacy.
Tracy, thank you. And rarely have I experienced you being on mute, but there's always a first for everything. Look, I'm actually comforted that thus far we haven't. And I think it's because of the very nature and clarity around the testing and the processes. Our medical delegate is the only one that will see the test. If there is anything to be followed up on, they will follow it up directly with the athlete. We're not testing for anything other than the eligibility or otherwise of that athlete. There's no DNA testing, there's no genetic testing. That is simply what we're looking for. It's a one-off test, and once that has been done, that's it. And as and when the information that we glean is deemed useful and absorbed, it is then destroyed. So I don't think we could. We've followed this very, very closely. We've done this to the highest and accepted standards of international medical practice. And look, I think we're in pretty good shape. But of course, if athletes individually had any concerns, we would want to reassure them that we've taken a lot of effort to make sure that those security issues are absolutely followed through. I suppose if there is a very strong positive, it is that everybody has worked tirelessly to help us do this. We've had very little discussion about why we're doing it, other than an absolute recognition that it is an important staging post in that commitment to women's sport. I'm not here to give advice to other international federations or even the International Olympic Committee, although the working group that is being set up by the new president, I'm delighted that I've had input into, and World Athletics will be represented around that table, and that comforts me, because we have led the way on pretty much all these issues, and that's a good place to be. So look, we will continue to do this. The World Championships is a very, very good platform for us to understand more about what the future of this testing looks like, because although it's a one-off test, we do have new generations of athletes coming through. So look, as we always do in everything we do, we will sit and reflect on what we've learned in the last few weeks and deliver over the coming years.
In an interview ahead of the Paris 2024 Olympic Games, historian Michael Waters, author of The Other Olympians, Fascism, Queerness and the Making of Modern Sports, had this to say.
I mean, there is this sort of whole anti-trans infrastructure behind so much of this discussion, and often these policies themselves, and in America, we see sort of how these policies on display at elite sports at the Olympics have trickled down in different ways into school sports, where they are sort of increasingly extreme. And what's different in the 1930s is that you don't really have that structured backlash to trans and intersex people in the way that you do today. And so what happens in the 1930s is that it's really this small group of sports officials who decide to pass what would eventually become the first modern sex testing policy. And it isn't necessarily because of some larger political movement.
Mm. Yeah, and the public reaction seems to be very different because of, as you say, there are certain groups that are pushing a particular agenda. And I think most people are probably in the middle somewhere, not really understanding the vagaries or any part of the discussion, and just wondering, why is this such a big issue in sport? But you've got some very, very vocal sports women who say that, it's taken women 100 years to get to the point they're at. And it's no surprise, like it's sort of aligning again in Paris 2024. We're talking about the first ever Olympic Games where there'll be 50% men, 50% women. And, so there's a lot riding on that. And the women saying it's taken over 100 years to get there. So why should we be giving up spaces we've fought so hard to occupy? And yet that doesn't take in the humanity of other people who we're saying don't belong, but where do they belong? This is kind of the difficulties of such conversations, and sport has shown time and time again that they're not really equipped to be able to deal with these scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, I just think like the sort of in even the way that that gets framed, the idea of giving up spaces just like reveals kind of the embedded assumptions in the way certain commentators are talking about this, which is this refusal to sort of validate the like gender of these athletes themselves. I don't think that these athletes would consider like trans or intersex women in sports would consider um, it that they're taking away a space. And I think that there's just a lot of embedded assumptions and a lot of just like disrespect for the skill and the humanity of just like all athletes in women's sports.
Until now, the IOC's gender framework advocated inclusion first, with the ability to test for unfair advantage on a case-by-case basis. One of those involved in the early discussions, which helped to develop that framework, was Madeleine Pape, a senior lecturer at the University of Lausanne, herself an Olympic 800-metre runner. Her interview can be heard in full on the latest episode of the Sports Ambassador podcast for paying subscribers on Patreon or Substack. Politically, it's fraught, any discussion around this area, but I just want to draw your attention to one of the documents that was sent to the Australian athletes before the team was named to go to Tokyo to compete at the World Championships there. And they were asked to attend a webinar. They were also given, it's about 3 pages or 2.5 pages long. But in that, it said that they did recommend that athletes actually get some sort of counselling before undergoing this test, and to make themselves aware of some of the implications should a test come back suggesting that they might have this SRY gene. Now, I thought that was quite heavy because I wondered if it was just easy and most people wouldn't have to worry. And I know the sports officials are very keen to say, look, it's quite simple, it's voluntary, but in fact it's not. It's mandatory if you want to compete at that level, and that it's very simple and most people don't have to worry about anything. But I guess for the few that might have to worry, and nobody knows who that is until they've been subjected to it, what are some of those ramifications?
Right. And I mean, I think something I really want to also just push back against this idea that this kind of testing is simple and straightforward and easy, and that there's nothing to see here in terms of just rights violations for all women. Actually, I mean, there are frameworks that exist in Australia, but also in a more binding sense in Europe, around how genetic testing should be conducted. And it's expected that it should be a voluntary process, that there should be very, very rigorous counselling accompanying individuals who are undergoing genetic testing, that there should be privacy surrounding the results and the data that results from genetic testing. These frameworks exist for good reasons. And in the case of sport, it sounds like Athletics Australia is trying to respect that athletes do indeed have the right to free and informed consent when it comes to genetic testing. But in practice, as you've pointed out, Tracy, there's nothing free, or I would imagine even necessarily informed about the participation of athletes in this testing protocol. And then, as you so importantly point out, any athlete who returns a positive test in the sense that there is the SRY gene present, what follows for that athlete can be extremely fraught and extremely complicated, extremely stressful, really depending again on, I would say, even on what country you're living in and what support you're able to actually get. Australian athletes are going to be in a much better position than athletes who are in a much less wealthy country with much less access to a robust medical system, with perhaps the possibility to get multiple opinions, etc. But it's, I think for all athletes, the impossibility to protect their identity and protect their privacy in such a situation just raises huge questions about the responsibilities of sports organizations and whether this practice, what justification can we really provide, especially given the science is under scrutiny and highly questionable.
So I imagine if you're in this situation, and World Athletics has said that, the data will be protected and athletes don't need to worry about that. But if you suddenly disappear from your national team, that's the first question anyone in the media is going to ask. And so having that level of protection really cannot be guaranteed, because unless you come up with another reason for why you're not there, all roads are going to point to Rome, so to speak. And I also think about a number of things. Before I spoke to you, I thought, how far can we go in whichever direction in this scenario, not just in our conversation, but where is this going to go? And a number of countries, France is probably the most high profile, where it's illegal to do a gender test unless it's for a very specific medical purpose. And so they have to, fly to third countries, or the athletics team had to get to Tokyo earlier to be able to have these tests. And then in the long run, as we've seen with pretty much every other development in sport, there comes a time where people are then accused of cheating the system. And I wonder if there's also going to be a potential scenario here where some countries will take this very responsibly and other countries may not. And then how do we guard against that if this is the policy that everyone is supposed to be following?
Mm-hmm. I mean, to me, it comes back to the responsibility of World Athletics here. I mean, I don't think the issue is going to be, well, at least in the first instance, the issue won't be that there are irresponsible federations, but rather that if we're talking about more than 200 national federations that are part of World Athletics, and such a short turnaround, like a month or thereabouts, for athletes competing in Tokyo to have provided their test results. I mean, World Athletics is in no position to guarantee what procedures are being followed across so many diverse national contexts. Let alone, as you point out, Tracy, the fact that in some countries athletes would even need to leave their country and find another place to do the test because of it being against the law in their own country. So this, I think there's, just from a practical point of view, it's inevitable that at some point there are going to be athletes that fall through the cracks, so to speak. And so as much as the intention, I think, of World Athletics is to be able to avoid a controversy at one of their major championships and to push that responsibility down to the national level so that it's no longer something that they have to deal with, the reality is that at some point, of course, there are going to be athletes who appear at the international level who nevertheless attract scrutiny and scandal because of the complexity of the governance landscape and international landscape.
So, what will the IOC's working group decide? One thing is certain, we may never know the identity of those who are making the decisions, but we will certainly know the identity of the athletes most impacted. Thanks for your support of the Sports Ambassador, where we dig a little deeper into the issues of sport. Why? Because sport always matters.
You know, I love talking to you.
Look, just to put it bluntly, there are some dickhead coaches and trainers out there.
I think I've actually heard that label applied to you.
Well, hopefully the whole thing will not develop into World War III.
The Sports Ambassador.